So, thanks everyone for being here today for this Allworth Institute brown bag. I have a piece of paper, but I'll just wing it here. I just want to draw your attention to other events we have coming up. There's a sheet outside that lists them. Our next brown bag is next Wednesday at noon in this room, and Allison Ione from graphic design and art and design, sorry. And Cheryl Brighton, who's in marketing, will be doing a presentation on the study abroad program they did on Nordic art. And we have lectures coming up and other brown bag presentations as well. But today we're very fortunate to have Dr. Jennifer Brady. She's always very generous, coming and sharing her international experiences and her research with us, and I want to thank her for that. She is an associate professor in the Department of World Languages and Cultures, and just to put in a little plug, there is a new learning community, living and learning community, focused on Spanish that Jennifer is involved with. That's for students, so that's very exciting. So I won't delay any longer. I was going to read you more things about Jennifer, but I don't know where I went to. So thanks for being here, and please give Dr. Brady a round of applause.
Thanks so much. It's nice to see you all, and anytime I get to speak into a microphone, it makes me pretty excited, so I'm glad to be here. Students, we do have information about our programs in World Languages and Cultures. I put some flyers on the table. We offer programming in German, Spanish, Chinese, French, and cultural entrepreneurship, and I know I see many students here already, so we think everyone should study a world language, and we'd love to have you all in class if you're interested. Thank you to Cindy and the Allworth Institute. Speaking of people being generous, Cindy is always such a wonderful, generous collaborator, so thanks so much, Cindy, and your team for organizing this and making the microphone work. Today I'm going to be talking about public humanities and placemaking in the context of contemporary Spain, and we are going to see some really great places. So I thought we could try something. We could start off thinking of a memory. So I'm going to invite you all to please think of a memory from your childhood that happened in a public space. So it may be a park, it may be a lake, it may be a festival, but something that brings you joy, something that's funny, something that's a positive memory for you. So go ahead and think of that memory, and if you feel comfortable, I invite you to share it with people around you, the person that you came with, a person sitting next to you. So let's go ahead and do that. A nice memory from your childhood in the public space. Just a minute here. Yeah, feel free to move back to these conversations, because I was hearing a lot of positive, joyous memories, a lot of good feelings. So what about these memories make them great, right? What about the spaces that you were occupying as a child make these great? I'm curious, how many of you thought of a memory where there were other people? Just raise your hand. Yeah. How many of you thought about a memory that took place in the green space or the blue space? Water, lake, parks. Yeah, excellent, wonderful. So if we had extra time, we could share more of our memories together, and perhaps we would see some of these commonalities. And I think we begin to see that these lovely, joyous memories take place with people most often, and take place in spaces that make us feel good, like green spaces and blue spaces. So we're going to see some examples of some of these lovely spaces in Spain and how they're recreating place. We are all anchored to places that we inhabit. So we drift in and out of public and private spaces as we go through our day. Our homes are our refuge, our personal and familiar spaces where we can unwind, we can be alone, we can be with family. But public spaces do something different. Our public spaces offer places to be together with others from our communities and to engage in shared experiences. Public spaces, our streets, our city blocks, our parks, our lakes, our gardens, bring community members together out of the isolation of the private into this public sphere. Public spaces only exist due to the people that move through them and continuously shape them. So new urbanist Jane Jacobs argued that cities in themselves are beings and ecosystems. People need the city just as much as the city needs the people. Through her accidental but very long career as an advocate for the city, Jacobs fought for the mindful development of the places we live, work, and visit. And she left a legacy of empowerment for citizens to trust their common sense and become advocates for their place. Jacobs worked her entire life to create public spaces that are safe and that enhance the lives of people. These quotes are very small, so let me read them to you. These are just a few quotes from Jane Jacobs. There's many fabulous tidbits, so I encourage you all to read her if you don't know about her. But she writes, "It may be that we have become so feckless as a people that we no longer care how things do work, but only what kind of quick, easy outer impression they give. If so, there is little hope for our cities and probably for much less in our society. But I do not think this is so." She writes, "Cities have the capability of providing something for everybody, only because and only when they are created by everybody." She writes, "The more successfully a city mingles everyday diversity of uses and users in its everyday streets, the more successfully, casually, and economically its people thereby enliven and support well-located parks, and that can thus give back grace and delight to their neighborhoods instead of vacuity." She writes, "Dull, inert cities, it is true, do contain the seeds of their own destruction and little else. But lively, diverse, intense cities contain the seeds of their own regeneration, with energy enough to carry over for problems and needs outside themselves." So during the acute phase of the COVID-19 pandemic, I'm sure that we all thought about our private spaces a lot. Many of us configured our homes to include home offices so we could work and meet remotely. Many of us spent time outdoors, revamping our gardens, our patios, just to have that little outdoor space that fulfilled us. However, these places could not replace what Homi Bhabha and Edward Soha denote as the third space. The concept of the third space has been used as a sociocultural term to designate communal space, as distinct from the home, which is our first space, or work, our second space. The third space has been defined as a nightclub, a sports arena, a museum, a church, etc., where the individual can where the individual can experience a transformative sense of self, identity, and relation to others. In 2020, public spaces became spaces where many of us felt on high alert. Our rhythm of life became more isolated and lonely as we stopped going out, we stopped traveling to see family and friends. We lost our third spaces. Now, this isolation, this absence of physicality and presence in public spaces creates the silence of the social. In the 2021 Handbook of Placemaking, Kara Courage puts it well when she writes that the pandemic is an anti-place. It is counter to the particularity of urban design and collective occupation, and has created a fear of human proximity and taken from us our familiar collective social experiences and sites of serendipitous encounters. So if we take a closer look at isolation and its natural human consequence of loneliness, we quickly see that human life is meant to be human-centered. Connection drives communities. Public spaces are meant to be lived in and used. In my current research, I'm interested in examining public spaces in Spain today to see how people are using the spaces in ways that enliven communities. Like many communities across the world and throughout history, communities in Spain have been developed around the concept of human-centered public living. People in the Iberian Peninsula in antiquity and the Middle Ages implemented what we would call today people-based city planning. They connected towns through a network of calzadas, these cobblestone roadways. We see a map of some of the calzadas in the Iberian Peninsula here. They built city centers around their public-facing plazas. They developed aqua infrastructure to transport water for crops and to develop hygiene practices. And here we see the most marvelous Roman structure, I believe, in Spain today, in Segovia, this aqueduct, which is really worth seeing in person. And many other advances. These public advances took specialized know-how from fields like engineering and architecture and more, but they also required designers to deeply understand people and cultures. Any casco viejo, or old city center, that you visit in Spain today will be organized around and for public life, with the plaza at the heart of it all. In fact, this is a topic that we tend to teach in our undergraduate Spanish courses focused on histories and cultures of Spain. So today I'm going to talk about two terms, placemaking and public humanities, which I hope to define for you all as we go along. Designing public spaces for the greater good of people is at the heart of placemaking. Placemaking motivates stakeholders to collectively and iteratively reshape public spaces that they inhabit for the advancement of the greater good. Government officials, community activists, public policymakers, nonprofit staff, community members, city planners, economists, private investors, academics, students, children, pensioners, and so forth, all collaborate to make positive changes in the public spaces that they work, live, and visit. Contemporary placemaking as a community of practice breaks down these silos that exist between these different groups of people and rather integrates a variety of perspectives about how we use public spaces, which allows for community members to exercise significant agency in the experience of their cities. Now, when it comes to placemaking, there's a variety of different definitions, all of which emphasize the development of communities by the people who live in them with the desired outcome of better places to live. Courage offers the following definition of placemaking. Placemaking is an approach and a set of tools that puts the community front and center of deciding how their place looks and how it functions. In the article, The Art of Inclusion, Phenomenology, Placemaking, and the Role of the Arts, McLennan offers the following understanding of placemaking. He writes, "Across space and time, places are made and remade in a multitude of ways by a multiplicity of agents. Sometimes this happens as a result of government intervention, at other times through bottom-up initiatives. In a broad sense, placemaking is used to describe the processes of creating spaces that are desirable for people to live, work, and visit." So placemaking is an iterative community of practice that seeks to understand complicated social issues, sometimes called wicked problems, and to develop a set of tools and strategies that help problem solve in order to make those issues better. An umbrella term, public humanities, seeks to, this is very small, sorry about that, seeks to create meaningful collaborations between diverse groups of people based on the collective good, with an attempt to recognize and deal with inequities of power and other socially constructed dynamics. And it seeks to use multimedia, visual art, written text, storytelling, archives of cultural heritage, public policy, exhibitions, and more in order to create physical and digital spaces where people may engage in collective sharing and learning, and this is important for students here, on significant topics that intend to promote and advance greater good for all. On their website, Humanities for All, the National Humanities Alliance, the NHA, has defined 5 goals of public humanities: to inform contemporary debates, to amplify community voices and histories, to help individuals and communities navigate difficult experiences, to expand educational access, and to preserve culture in times of crisis and change. So public humanities projects are one branch of the larger concept of placemaking. They often are not intentionally driven by desired economic outcome, but rather the primary goal is didactic and communal in order to enhance lives for communities and open up opportunities for civic engagement. Public humanities projects often have these didactic goals, which is why they're so perfect for teachers and students to engage in as part of our learning and teaching that we do here, for instance, on our campus and our community. The social greater good is at the heart of public humanities projects when done right. Placemaking is a dynamic set of tools that may include public humanities projects. However, placemaking may also include outcomes for athletics, leisure, tourism, sustainability, growth, economic growth, and more. So as a cultural studies scholar who researches literature, film, and other cultural texts, and I think anything can be a text, if we can analyze it, right, it's a text, in the context of contemporary Spain. I'm deeply interested in understanding how placemaking initiatives are developed and administered, who is involved in the direction and the management, and what the desired and actual outcomes of the projects are on communities where they exist. This work has practical significance because not only am I conceptualizing the outcomes of public humanities work in the public sphere, but I'm also compiling a toolkit of placemaking best practices. In addition, this work informs my teaching. I'm currently creating this collaborative, open access, peer-reviewed digital space for educators and others, for instance, to share lesson plans and methodologies for the teaching and learning of placemaking. So Spain, and I'm going to get to some examples right now, but Spain in the 21st century has been and continues to be a really fertile ground for public humanities and placemaking. Public cultural projects in Spain in the 21st century are responding to these social needs for more just communities, the greater good, and deeper is civic engagement. There are many examples. Today, I'd like to share with you all 3 examples of placemaking projects in Spain in recent years. One small-scale project, one sort of larger project, and then one mega project that we see in Spain. Okay, you guys doing good? Great. So when you look at these signs, you can, there's no words here, we're not reading, but we can definitely understand what these symbols tell us. So in many parts of our world, most parts of our world, we can find this symbol of a person that helps tell us when it's safe or not to cross the street, right? You guys have seen these, everyone's seen these, we know what these mean. So to commemorate World Pride that took place in Madrid in June of 2017, the municipal government of Madrid replaced some pedestrian walk signs in centric neighborhoods at the cost of 22,000 euros with inclusive signs. Here are the new signs. These new pedestrian signs replaced that flashing green and red representation of a human figure that we all know. And that we might assume, even though it's not a human, but we can assume that maybe it's a man according to normative norms around hairstyles and dress, right? This person, this representation is wearing pants, this representation has short hair, right? So there's some assumptions that can be made there according to hegemonic norms. Now, these new street signs have 2 iterations. You can see 2 people wearing skirts, holding hands. One has a ponytail, one has a shorter haircut. And you see 2 people wearing pants with short hair holding hands, which you see in the other image here. 288 pedestrian signs on 78 street corners in Madrid were replaced in this manner. And they weren't taken down after Pride ended. It is of note that Madrid is the 2nd city in Spain to take on the streetlight project. Cádiz, which is in southern Spain, the very tip of Andalusia, was the first municipality to install these inclusive walk signs in Spain. Previously, Vienna was the first European city that had them installed, which happened in 2015 for the Eurovision Festival. Vienna, in fact, and these are interesting terms, I'm going to use my air quotes here. Vienna has been touted as a gender-neutral destination, right? After undergoing in the past few years a gender-sensitive redesign for its city, which included the construction of a Mädchenbühne, a girls' stage. My German colleagues here, I was really looking forward to saying that word. Oh, thank you. A girls' stage in the city's main square. And even though it's called, it's called a girls' stage, the stage is a stage in the plaza, right, where anybody can participate and they have events there and performances, musical and otherwise. And the interesting thing, Vienna has a municipal unit called the Department for Gender Mainstreaming that is in charge of all of these initiatives that are taking place. Now, the process of gender mainstreaming a place requires questioning for whom the spaces were created in the first place. Ostensibly, the updated walk signs in the Spanish capital were meant to make inclusion more visible in the city center. The municipal government affirms, el ayuntamiento dice que los semáforos son importantes para promover la igualdad de género, dado su impacto visual. The municipal government says that the street signs are important to promote gender equality given their visual impact. The new Madrilenian walk signs absolutely amplify representation compared to that original one person, right? To borrow a term from Andrew Slack, the walk sign intervention in the Spanish capital is a type of act of cultural acupuncture, or piercing the daily habits of a community with a cultural intervention with the desired outcome of healing, right? Acupuncture heals, it doesn't harm, right? Slack writes that cultural acupuncture is finding where the psychological energy is in the culture and moving that energy towards creating a healthier world. Healthier in the biggest sense. It is really interesting that placemaking projects and public humanity campaigns often use this term acupuncture to refer to the insertion of a healing cultural text into a place. The concept of cultural acupuncture comes from Slack, who has quite cleverly figured out, according to one scholar, and this is a quote, how to harness the energy created by a pop cultural event, such as Harry Potter, such as the Harry Potter movie premiere, and redirect it as an important real-life cause, such as genocide in Darfur. Slack's cultural acupuncture rallies fans of Harry Potter to use themes from the novels and films to create large waves of chatter on social media about current events. Cultural studies scholar Doris Sommer also uses this term to refer to the healing nature of public humanities projects. She writes that cultural acupuncture emphasizes social practices that can be pressed into service for collective healing. Cultural acupuncture in cities works as a sort of small-scale insertion of acts and projects that invite those who pass through the space to notice, to question, to participate either consciously or subconsciously. So conceived as a public humanities project under the auspice of placemaking, the inclusive street signs in Madrid brush up with at least one of the characteristics of public humanities outlined by the NHA, in that they amplify community voices and histories, even if they do so in a normative physical representation of so-called feminine and masculine appearances, clothing and hairstyles. So it's important, and I'd like to spend a few minutes with you all on conceptualizing what these new street signs do not do. The representation that the new signs bring to the capital is limited. Perhaps we can interpret a gay couple to men, we can interpret a lesbian couple to women. The new images, even though they do invoke the visibility of same-sex couples, they rely on normative symbols of dress and hairstyles to signify man and woman. This may reinforce actually this outdated binary. So we can ask the following questions. Does the use of traditional notions of clothing and appearance override the attempt at an inclusive message for neighborhoods? Does the progress towards inclusion actually highlight exclusion? Say representations of people who identify as women who wear pants or have short haircuts, or even more representations of people who maybe use wheelchairs, representations of all bodies and non-binary identities or trans people. However, this insertion, I believe, of the walk signs into the everyday routines of the people of Madrid in these neighborhoods forces those who are crossing the street to engage at some level with the signs. What the signs mean to pedestrians will differ. There's interviews available on YouTube where you hear people talk about what they think about these signs. But one positive outcome is that people have to consider their opinions of same-sex couples upon seeing these inclusive street signs, either in their minds or with their friends or family that they're walking with. So this initiative came from the prior mayor of Madrid, Manuela Carmena's government, but I have not found any record about who was consulted during the decision-making process and the implementation process. We know that successful placemaking projects must be based on consultation, collaboration with creative practitioners and the people who live in the communities, and more. Courage notes that placemaking is a community of practice. Here we are, that foments an ecology of cultural thinking with dynamic aspects within a larger ecosystem. Feedback loops, emergent behavior, and interdependence and self-organization. Courage goes on to note, who is allowed a place in our places, who is heard there, and who sits at the decision-making table determines what our places can be, and an emancipatory and intersectional placemaking is key to achieving place justice. Now, it is possible to have successful policy initiatives led by city agencies that engage the wider public in dialogue and critical thinking, that even in small ways, like this example, expand cultural practices and beliefs for the greater good. What does this success look like and how it can be measured is something that I'm still working on. There was absolutely a decision-making process by leadership in Madrid about how to celebrate World Pride, for sure, because there was an editing process that took place at various city agency levels. To wit, en un primer momento también se planeó pintar algunos pasos de cebra con los colores de arco iris que caracterizan al movimiento gay, pero la policía desechó la opción por no ajustarse a la normativa. At first, they had planned to paint some of the crosswalks rainbow-colored, which characterizes the gay community, but the police decided against the option because it did not conform to regulations. Now, there's a tidbit of information here that's way too good not to mention. Who decided that the street signs were okay, but these rainbow crosswalks weren't? And what are these norms of the city that they're so-called perpetuating? So think about that more, and I think it's a really interesting question. We can move on to the next project. Urban acupuncture in Zaragoza. So spurred by a competition of artistic interventions in vacant, decaying city plots, in 2006, called Everyday's Voids, and subsequently by the development of an employment plan after the economic recession of 2008, architects Patricia Di Monte and Ignacio Bravalos, along with the Zaragoza Municipal Housing Society, founded this campaign called Esto no es un solar. This is not an empty plot in Zaragoza. The project sought to redesign lots in the historic city center of Zaragoza to make them 100% usable public spaces. I have a video. I'll play some images for you all as I'm talking about this so you can see what these plots changed into. Okay. Excellent. So the project sought to redesign these lots, and then a team was hired by the city government to convert the lots into usable spaces, and that's an interesting part here. Some of the projects are oriented towards what scholars call green placemaking, by converting the empty plots into usable garden and leisure spaces. Some of the projects include converting empty plots into an urban garden for all to use and maintain, and sometimes with active learning spaces for students and teachers, places to park your bike, trees, a small sort of boardwalk situation, and play areas for people young and old. Some projects offer places for kids to play, others offer places for pensioners to gather. The plots where all can gather seem to be the ones with the most varied and continuous use. The Project for Public Spaces website describes the campaign, and here's a quote that has a lot of information about the campaign. Since this initiative began, there have been interventions in 33 sites throughout the city, More than 42,000 square meters of public space has been recovered and transformed throughout the city of Zaragoza, and more than 60 citizen associations have been involved throughout the process. Within the first 13 months of the program, Esto no es un solar created 110 jobs for unemployed workers in Zaragoza. End of quote. Using classic lighter, quicker, cheaper strategies, abandoned plots were repurposed into urban gardens, simple green spaces, playgrounds for children. Here's street bowling or petanca for usually older folks. And these lighter, quicker, cheaper strategies allow the public spaces to be converted into something different for different uses in a really easy and affordable way that can continually be adapted for the way the space is being used. The Esto no es un solar campaign offers a clear example of how the private, public, and governmental sectors work together to transform problematic city sites into usable community spaces for sustained public management and use. Even though the question remains of how to measure success of these projects, we can see positive change, positive change in the right direction to create more well spaces and obviously jobs for citizens in Zaragoza. Finally, it's worth mentioning that the empty plot revitalization campaign has grown. Municipalities throughout Europe have been using this model. And in fact, recently here in Duluth, small grants have been awarded to help citizens revitalize public spaces with the Love Your Block campaign. If you read the DMT, they just published recently, maybe 2 weeks ago, on people who've received those small grants for their spaces. Really interesting, right? Okay. I have one more example for you, and then I would love to hear from you all and answer any questions or hear any comments that you have. This last section is this mega project, right? And this is a great example of blue placemaking, which we see in Valencia, Spain, which is on the Mediterranean coast. As a waterfront city, Valencia is one of Spain's largest cities. On the sunny coast of the Mediterranean Sea, Valencia has recently undergone extensive renovation to its waterways, this area called La Marina. In fact, the week-long International Placemaking Festival was celebrated in Valencia in 2019, partly because of this positive economic, tourism, and social impact of this mega project. With the goals of productive activation of an underutilized space of high historic, cultural, and real estate value, and sustainable meaning collaboration with the community, this maritime district was transformed into a highly attractive place for community members, businesses, and tourists alike. Here in this photo collage, you all are seeing some varied uses of the spaces, from commerce to tourism, to water fun, to land fun activities, and so forth. The revitalization project developed as it was happening. There were no master plans. In fact, like the Esto no es un solar campaign, this project in Valencia began with a street art competition in which businesses were asked to collaborate with artists to paint their storefront gates. Yeah? And then the project grew into this large redevelopment of the space once investors recognized the economic and cultural value of the place. The approach to revitalizing the waterfront flipped the script. Instead of design-based planning, the project was carried out through unplanned experimentation, collaboration, and reflection. The waterfront revitalization thus opted against outdated models of urban planning, including laissez-faire, elite-led urban development with limited state control, market-led planning, or box ticking, or other approaches to urban redevelopment that we have seen at the beginning of this 21st century. That idea of leading by design did not happen here in La Marina. Collaboration and conversation was what led this project. So in the recent article titled Planning from Failure, Transforming the Waterfront Through Experimentation in a Placemaking Living Lab, Ramon Marrades and his co-authors discussed this recent shift from a design-led approach to urban planning, which boosted the high-end cultural economy of cities, but that in many instances reproduced and even deepened the disconnect between development outcomes for local people, cultures, and uses, and has been heavily criticized as restrictive, preventative, rather than regenerative of new ideas and practices. So in La Marina, that's what we did, that did not happen. What happened was place-led planning, right? So this idea that the place and the people guide the project. And Marades and his co-authors write, place-led approaches offer to bridge the exchange and user value gap by reconceptualizing city sites as places, prioritizing and responding to changing demands from communities, and focusing on people, not profit. But what happens? These places are profitable, right? And this is a great example. The focus was on people from the very beginning, but now this is a place where everyone wants to be. The Marina Mega Project emphasizes how economic impact can drive projects to create more jobs and generate more movement and augmentation of capital for the city due to tourism and the community, and community engagement, all while creating a place for all and creating the greater good of a community. So with this, I'll go ahead and work towards a conclusion here. We've seen here today 3 levels of recent placemaking in Spain. First, the low-cost, relatively low-risk project of the inclusive walk signs in Madrid, led by the socialist municipal government of Mayor Carmona. This is one example of cultural acupuncture. The street signs, no matter how steeped in maybe incomplete meaning they are visible markers that everyone who crosses the street has to engage with in one way or another. The project is an example of public humanities in that the street signs had no potential of economic gain. People who attended World Pride in Madrid, for example, would have attended World Pride in Madrid if the street signs were there or not. Second, we saw the Esto no es un solar project in Zaragoza. This project highlights how art and green placemaking for all can create more well communities by creating jobs and spaces that add positive change to a place. And finally, the Mega Project in Valencia is an example of how a street art project meant to engage creative practitioners in inserting small-scale art projects to storefronts in the city spurred a mega renovation of the waterfront, which has had large economic benefit and has added cultural value to the area. All 3 of these placemaking examples were guided by different desired goals. The street signs had no economic outcome, but did come from a government initiative. For what desired outcome? Was this simply political posturing? Was this an attempt at inclusive placemaking? Those are questions I asked myself in my research. Second, the renovation of the empty city plots in Zaragoza were born from a private artistic consortium that then looped in the municipal government. And third, the Marina project in Valencia shows how a for-profit project may be done in a way that involves perhaps more stakeholders than design of cities has done before. So in a recent book chapter, I did ponder if it's possible to legislate culture. My conclusion is that it's a step in the right direction. These steps in the right direction, that's to say, in the direction of creating more inclusion, creating more opportunities for engagement, are in themselves positive outcomes. In order for those steps to be meaningful, municipal agencies, the private sector, and community members must work in meaningful ways together through a thorny, iterative process of creation and implementation. This rhizomatic nature of successful placemaking allows for projects to begin from any point, from the community or grassroots, from a private company, or from the government. With a collaborative approach thereafter, the project has a chance to be successful. Courage does wonder. The top-down, bottom-up dialogue is given much noise in placemaking, but is this dialogue meaningful? Marines and his co-authors also state that cities are complex assemblages to which top-down, linear modes of planning are problematic at best. So co-design, inclusive participation, I think, are the mainstays of placemaking and are what steer public humanities projects away from the path towards neoliberalism. Local people must be at the heart of the planning and implementation processes. Their roles must be front and center, no matter how they get there. This shift in how projects are carried out allows for a new approach to placemaking, one that's not vertical, one that's not horizontal, but one that is much more rhizomatic and intersectional, based in empathy, co-creation, curiosity, collaboration. So I will conclude with this. Places are meant to be occupied. Earlier this week, I returned from Placemaking Europe week with my colleague here, Professor Jennifer Webb from Art and Design. We have our one photo we took together. I put it up on the slide. And at the event, the mayor of Pontevedra, a town in Galicia, which my students know is in northwest Spain, talked about the project in their city. The conference was in Pontevedra, so it was great to hear from this mayor. And he talked about his city project to pedestrianize large areas, large city blocks, many city blocks, and to prohibit cars, right? And they've been doing this for 35 years in Pontevedra. Pontevedra is a walking city por excelencia, not only because of its pedestrian-friendly streets, but also because the Camino Portugués de Santiago passes through the city. The mayor said something that has stuck with me, and I think Jen too, right? The mayor said, public space is a basic, universal human right, just like education, just like healthcare. Later that same day, one of the presenters mentioned this, also it's in my mind, if we can't love our places, how can we love our planet? So I'll leave you all with those two quotes. I would love for you to contemplate them a bit more as we think about ways we can continue to reinvigorate our community here in Duluth, our world communities, and then also our community here at UND. So thanks so much for listening, and I'm just so glad you're here. Thank you.
Do we have any questions or comments? Marina.
Thank you, that was awesome. I'm fascinated by those 3 placemaking projects, and the one that really stands out for me is the second one. Especially in terms of, I don't know about whatever funding sources there were, but in terms of the actual implementation, all the materials in all of those different non-empty plot spaces, right? Those were really inexpensive materials that were repurposed. So, I mean, really what made all of that happen, it seems, at least from the images and from what you were saying, was just simply creativity and the desire to create spaces. But I don't know, like, did you?
Thank you so much.
Can you speak more to that second one? Because, like, I was looking at the, like, some of the pallets look to be repurposed
Oh,
pallets.
absolutely.
Merchandise containers, you know, like shipping containers and stuff like that, they were stacked on each other. Paint and cement. And I'm thinking, and of course there were some other materials in some of the others, but I thought, wow, that's just brilliant. So in terms of making something magically transformed, it really didn't take a lot. Like, it wasn't pulling on anyone's purse strings too much. So I don't know, it's just really impressive.
I'm so glad you noticed that. I mean, that's one of the strategies of good placemaking, is that lighter, quicker, cheaper, and really using materials that can be repurposed. Paint is something that can be changed easily, so we saw at the Placemaking Week a lot of projects where people would paint like bike lanes in their communities illegally, right? Because they can go and they just need a can of paint and you paint a bike lane, or you paint a street in front of a school, and when you do that, cars stop driving on it, right? So kids can play there and be more safe walking to school. So this is one of the strategies of placemaking, is to use those lighter, quicker, cheaper options. And maybe at first glance it seems like, oh, that's cheap, why would they do that? But the idea is that it's almost like a temporary, movable situation where once it's observed how people are using that space, then it's in constant transformation. So if you see that one of those plots is really being used for urban gardening, then maybe you would invest a little bit more money and create longer lasting garden beds, for instance, right? But these are projects that are constantly in transformation. And those materials, just reusing materials, is key in just being able to keep them in that transformation. Also the change of seasons. I mean, Spain doesn't usually get as strong of weather as we do here with our change of seasons, but thinking of being able to easily remove perhaps some furniture or some tables when it's snowing and put something else there, or keep it there and use it during the snow. So it's a really, you don't need a lot of money to make a big change. We're seeing that all over Spain, and paint is cheap, right? And when you're in Spain, you see these gates, you know, they're these large sort of garage doors that close store shops, right? And many of them are painted, right? Murals are painted, streets are painted. It's a way for artistic expression, but it's also a way to create place in the ways that we talked about today. Thank you so much for your comment. Thanks for being here. Thank you, I'm glad you're here.
This is wonderful. Thank you for presenting this. I'm just curious how applicable, and maybe connecting the dots with what you were saying about the pandemic and the kind of isolation and separation, right, and how that undermines community. To what extent is this applicable, especially in our sort of home culture here, where there's so much individuality and so much separation already, even before we had a pandemic to contend with. I don't feel like the European sort of structures of community are inherent here, like we have to work at that. So just curious, you know, sort of how you view any kind of translative cultural acupuncture that could occur.
Well, I think Duluth has a lot of possibility to be a city like these cities that we have seen. It needs to get more dense, but we have a lot to place already. We have a lot of good stuff going on, right? And we see these initiatives where placemaking is happening in our city, where they like convert Canal Park. I know last summer or the summer before they shut down a block in Canal Park, and I put out little tables. These parklets, you know, are small examples. So your question's a really good question. I've been thinking about it a lot, and I think we can start with our own places, right? We can start with our own blocks, our own streets, and make small changes. I mean, maybe it's putting up with those little libraries, which are really great, or maybe it's just as simply putting up, like my daughter's always drawing on this with the chalk, right? And creating these beautiful designs. And as I've been learning more about placemaking, I'm like, oh yeah, here's a 12-year-old girl creating place, right? She's using art to send a message, and people are walking by and seeing this and commenting. So there's little sort of cultural acupuncture things we can all be doing. But Misha, I was thinking, when I was in Pontevedra with Jennifer, thinking about our community of UMD, right? Yeah. We have people, we are a community, so what can we be doing to create a stronger sense of place? We have this great poster culture here. In fact, when I came to visit campus 9 years ago, or 10 years ago before I took the job, I was impressed with all of the posters, right? There used to be more. But that's one way that we're doing something visual to connect, right, and to communicate. What are other things we could be doing? I know Art and Design is doing a pop-up store where students are, or market, where students will be selling the art that they've made, right? The ceramics pieces and all of that. So that's coming up October 15th. That's another example. So we're never going to be Madrid, but we are a community of people, right? And creating more ways that we can be together and share experiences is really fulfilling, I think. Thanks for your question, Misha. Let's continue to think about that.
I would like to.
Yeah. See, Peyton.
Yeah, so I really enjoyed your presentation, and I recently studied abroad in Morocco, and so your idea of like placemaking and stuff in Spain, it kind of reminded me of like thinking about placemaking and how they use it there. And so like your three spaces of like home, work, and communal spaces is that third space. It was making me think their work and their lifestyle there, they kind of like mesh their second and third space together. So like in Medina, when they walk through, they're working and they're shopping, they're trying to sell their products and stuff, and they're also like talking to their neighbors, their friends in the community, and I just thought that was really cool. And like I was walking through the Medina once with my host mom, and she wasn't gonna buy anything, but she just wanted to go by and say hi to all her friends and like the community around. I thought that was really cool.
Yeah, and it gave you a good feeling, right?
Yeah, right.
Yeah, and no, and Jane Jacobs would call that really like mixed use, right?
Yeah.
Having commerce, having artistic expression, having the basic needs of like selling food, buying food, available to the community is the basis of strong communities. So have you thought of ways that you can bring back a little bit of that to Duluth, Minnesota?
Tried, yeah, thinking about it.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you for sharing that. I think that's great. That's that mixed use piece, right?
Yeah. And then they have like down, like, I was in the capital of Morocco, which is Rabat, and they have like this Marina that's been like totally like revamped to where like they have like little cafes on there, and then they have like this, you pay like €5, which is like 50 cents in US dollar, and you pay like €5 to cross like the little inlet from Rabat to Saleh, which is the other city. And it's just awesome how like how hard they work for their money, how creative they are, and like also like creating a community.
I love that. Yeah. That's how a place should be, right? Places only exist by the people who move through them. So that's really lovely. Yeah. Cindy.
I don't want to interrupt if anyone else has a question, but I kind of have two comments, and I don't know if this fits, but I know in Superior, where I live, over the years now they've had artists paint on the sidewalks, you know, different spots. Does that fit into this?
Absolutely. I mean, really anything that can be analyzed, or you can wonder what's the meaning of this.
And it's often tied to, you know, the culture within Superior and the lake, and I know Chelsea Miller, who works here in the library, has done a couple of them in Superior, so it's good. The other question I have is, do you think that our culture in the U.S. is as open to this as other places? Because I think about places where graffiti are these great works of art and they're much more accepted, and we so many times tend to like our lawns to look exactly the same, things like that, that, you know, we aren't necessarily as creative unless I'm just missing it.
Well, you're very creative, Cindy. I think I haven't seen those sidewalk designs. I'll have to cross over the bridge and look. I'm interested in that. But I think this goes back to what Nietzsche was saying. Our society has been created as like individuals, right? And this has happened over the past, you know, really the 20th century, where people started moving to the suburbs, leaving the cities. Jane Jacobs in the 60s was saying, come back to the city. The city, we need eyes on the streets. We need people in our streets to keep them safe and to keep them alive, right? And we need people living and walking those streets, right? So she was a big advocate of people moving back to the city. So that was in the 60s. I think Duluth, I mean, I think we have a lot of potential where, and I don't know Superior that well, Cindy, but Duluth has a sense of being more urban, right, because of our history. And if we can fill in some of those empty areas and make stronger connections between some of these old notions of east versus west, for example, I think we have a lot of potential. But yeah, right, there's this mindset of people in the U.S. to have their own spaces, right? You have your fence, you get in your car, you drive to work, drive home, you go back into your little defined space. So Jane Jacobs is like the star in trying to subvert that notion a little bit. So I'm not saying, like, I like driving my car for sure, right? But I also feel I have a good feeling when I take the bus. I like having that third space, that community, right? So really, I think if we can find small ways to incorporate some of this good living, our communities will just get stronger and healthier and better. Well, thank you.